In this video, I'll be going over the BART system. So BART is a way to understand group and organizational dynamics at the group and individual level. It is applicable to most human systems, organizations, and group work, including personal and professional development. By using BART, members of teams, groups, and organizations can learn about the aspects of group dynamics. In our class, while we have been learning about adaptive leadership, we have also been learning and observing our group dynamics. Having seen our group dynamics through the case analyses this first half of the semester, we can now look back and examine ourselves through the BART system. Think about how our group has reacted to authority, formal and informal. Have you seen resistance to the task at hand? And how has the group and its members responded when someone takes up their leadership? Organizations can benefit from learning about their group dynamics and the makeup of their teams. BART can help with preventing loss of resources, off-task behavior, productivity issues, as well as reducing stress, frustration, and potential conflicts. Again, looking at our class as a case, think about the potential conflicts you've seen at the interpersonal level, as well as the intergroup level. When applying BART at the individual level, it can also help you understand the internal personal dynamics, especially how you are willing or not willing to take up a leadership role or other roles that support or thwart the task at hand. By examining yourself through the BART system, you can see when you may be overstepping boundaries, authority, and roles, which can lead to consequences. Other benefits include preventing burnout or compassion fatigue, as well as protecting you from potential negative outcomes. The B in BART stands for boundary, which is the container for our group work. If it isn't adequate or has holes, it will not support the task. Thus, establishing and paying attention to boundaries is in support of the task. There are several types of boundaries: time, territory, task, and resources. For instance, in our class, examples of time boundaries include the start and end times of our class, the deadlines or due dates of our assignments. Now, how firm or flexible these boundaries also matter. For instance, in our class, while I have established due dates in the system, there's also a grace period. Whereas if we think about a flight departure, the time that it takes off is very firm, and potentially you can miss your flight if you do not board on time. Territory is the space in which work happens in a group. Think national states and country borders. There's a clear demarcation between one group and the other. Think about geographic boundaries or jurisdictions. When the boundaries of territory are unclear, this can result in turf battles. The task boundary is the way the work is understood and how it will be conducted. The task should align with the mission. When the boundaries around tasks become muddled, this can result in less than desirable deliverables or even a loss of mission and vision. Resources as boundaries can determine individuals' or organizations' capacity to complete even the most rudimentary tasks. Thus, who owns, manages, and obtains the resources can determine success or failure. Thus, it can be helpful when we're thinking about boundaries. What are the consequences of breaking or not having clear boundaries, which can then help you to establish better boundaries to avoid the negative consequences. That's why boundaries need to be clearly specified, as in the when, what, and where, or specific time and location in the task. Boundaries need to be agreed upon by the invested parties, including how they are interpreted. Boundaries also need to be adhered to. Do we view these boundaries as guidelines or clear instructions in support of accomplishing the task? So for instance, in our class, when thinking about the leader interview project, your teams will want to clearly specify, agree upon, and determine how you want to adhere to the boundaries set for your group. When boundaries are unclear, this can lead to conflict within your team. The A in BART stands for authority, and we've learned about this before through the Heifetz reading, but it is the right to do work and is conferred power to perform some service. Now, when you take up your authority, you also assume the responsibility and accountability for your actions as well as inactions. Formal or delegated authority involves one person or group giving over or delegating some of their own formal authority so that another might do certain work on their behalf. When thinking about your teams, you might have one formal project lead who delegates tasks to the group, or you may even share that formal authority when making decisions on who is doing what on the project. When delegating that work, you are conferring authority to your teammates to do a portion of the work while you focus on other aspects of the work. Personal authority is how an individual takes up their authority, and it can be influenced by things like social identities, culture, background, education, psychological makeup. So in our class, we've talked about introverts and extroverts, and so how they take up their personal authority can look different. R in BART stands for role. This is the function, assumed, or part played by someone in a particular situation. Now, roles can be achieved, acquired, assigned, or even ascribed to us. Roles can range from moments in time to a lifetime, and they can be a reflection or equated with our identity. For instance, my educator role is deeply ingrained in part of my professional identity. Formal roles are like a job description. It has duties and parameters for completing a task. Formal roles also include certain people and processes that are involved, as well as outcomes and deliverables that mark a successful performance of your role. In other words, we need to be able to define what success looks like. Clarity on role is important because misperceptions occur frequently. Think about roles at work when you believe that someone's role includes specific duties, but they believe that's beyond the scope of their work and say, that's not my job. It's also important to be aware of how others perceive you in that role and how that influences their behavior. For instance, in my role as the instructor, I'm aware that in my authority role, this impacts the way you see me. If we were in a different role, different context or setting, and I was not in this position, our behaviors or interactions are likely going to be different. Role is intricately connected with authority and boundaries. Misperceptions of a role can also result in misperceptions of authority and boundaries. And then there are informal roles. While they're not in the job description or contract, they can serve to fill gaps of authority and tasks that have been abandoned, yielded, or implicitly ceded to them by the organization or group. So thinking about your project teams, you might each be assigned a role, but if you notice someone is not fulfilling that role, you might take up the informal role to fill in that gap. And in class, we'll spend some time exploring informal roles more. The T in BART stands for task. This is an activity that needs to be accomplished within a defined period of time. Every task has never been done before. And while you may say, well, it's the same thing I've done before in another class, or this is something similar I did at work just last week. Yes, similar tasks may have been done before, but the time boundary is what makes it different. Thus, the task remains dynamic. And it's not just about the time boundaries. Each person involved with the task also brings their perceptions to that moment. So we tend to import our histories and experiences of a task and of people. That's why it's so important that we be conscious of what we bring into a situation. Although we might not realize it, most of us are engaged in curious reenactments of past triumphs or tragedies related to similar tasks. In other words, we all have some baggage that we're bringing into a situation, and that can affect the way we perceive one another and behave towards one another. There are 3 types of tasks. The first is the primary task. That's the functional or work task of your group, of your team, of your organization. Secondly, there's the survival task. This is the unconscious attempt for the group to ensure the group's survival. And there are unconscious off-task behaviors that can occur, such as dependency, pairing, fight or flight, oneness, competition, as well as differing relationships between the members. And last is the process task. This gives attention to the survival task without acting out. The primary task and process task are very similar to what we learned in adaptive leadership, what we refer to as the content task and the process task. So the additional task that we're considering is the survival task. It is crucial that everyone in the group is clear about what the task is at hand. It is also important to realize that the task is always fluid because of factors that influence the way someone perceives the task at hand. Now that you have an understanding of the BART system, we will be applying it to a case later this week. If you have any questions, just let me know.